What up, dudes? Matt here from YoVideogames, back with another video game review, which we haven't really done in a while, but I figured this is probably one people might be most interested in hearing about, and that is the recent release of NieR Replicant, a sort of quasi-remaster remake of the original NieR, which released in 2010. Now, if you think I'm going to pronounce the full title of the game, you can kiss my ass. NieR Replicant is based off of NieR Replicant, which only released in Japan, so just a little backstory. Back in 2010, in Japan, there were two releases, NieR Replicant and NieR Gestalt. And basically, it boils down to NieR Replicant, you played as the brother NieR, and then in NieR Gestalt, you played as Papa NieR. And when they brought the game to the West, they only brought Gestalt over. Now, that doesn't mean they only brought over the Xbox 360 version, because in Japan, PS3 brother, Xbox 360 dad. In America, PS3 and 360, both dad. So they technically ported the 360 version to the PS3 and only released that in North America. I think they got that right. But anyways, this version is strictly Replicant, which means it's strictly Brother NieR. That's like the only big difference. I don't even know why I'm starting with that, but whatever. Just so you know, this is a remaster of a sort of previously only Japanese version of the original NieR from 2010. Now, I, like many others, got introduced to the series through NieR Automata, and the only reason I got introduced was because of the Platinum Games logo on it. So I knew of the existence from other people who had played through the NieR games, or the singular NieR game back then. I knew of its existence, and I definitely knew about Drakengard, and I didn't know they were connected necessarily. But it was only through Automata that I actually became interested in the series at all. And I kind of feel like I dodged a bullet there a little bit, as far as gameplay is concerned. And Automata was very intriguing, so looking back, you know, if you want to have a series recap, I highly recommend you go and watch Clemps' videos on the subject on YouTube. I'll probably throw the link in the description below, but he basically goes through beat by beat, like full story walkthroughs of Drakengard 1 through 3 and NieR Automata. So if you've ever wanted to sort of familiarize yourself with all the goings on and ins and outs of this sort of loosely connected multiverse game series, highly recommend doing that, at least for the Drakengard games, because at least with Replicant now, you might be interested in actually playing through this one and discovering the plot points and the revelations yourself. So for this review, I'm not really going to talk about anything super late game or anything. I'll be very vague if I have to mention anything on that. So the big key difference and takeaway from here is that it definitely tries to adopt a much more NieR Automata style battle system. That's obviously the big crux of, you know, the remake, remaster, what have you here with NieR Replicant. Now, just getting right down to it, does it succeed? Yes and no, really. Mostly no. I mean, is it as good as NieR Automata's combat system? No, it's not. Is it, at least from what I can see, better than what we had in the original NieR game released on the 360 PS3? Absolutely. It looks leagues better than that game, and it plays pretty well. It feels good. Combat feels good. I never felt that I didn't want to fight things. I think combat works. It feels good. It never feels annoying to fight things necessarily. Now, there are some sort of annoying bits, particularly the fact that I don't feel the parry mechanic, the timing is off to me. It feels like it wants you to parry attacks way before the attack even hits rather than on the hit. Sometimes even the quick dodging can feel a little loose. It doesn't quite have the same sort of tight controls as Automata does. And the book, which is basically like the pod companion in Automata, he's pretty cool because it does a lot of the similar things that the pod programs do, but you do lose other things, like you're not able to hover in the air after a double jump and stuff like that. So there's a little bit of just general mobility stuff you don't have. Like the pod had abilities to say, like, use it as like a whip or like a hook shot to like zip yourself around the back, like to the enemies after knocking them away and stuff like that. That being said, there's still cool stuff here. There's finishers and launchers and stuff like that, and there's light and heavy attacks, which I believe are different in this battle system compared to the original. I don't really know because I didn't really play the original. I saw some videos on it from Clemps, of course, and even the best friends playing, and holy god, I'm not diving into that, not even for curiosity. The other big thing for me difference-wise and I think you'll notice it right away, is that the original game had a very washed out and exceedingly heavy use of bloom effects back in 2010. Like, you know, like games were ought to do in the early 360 era, even though it wasn't really early 360, it was like mid 360 era. Holy shit, the original game was big on the bloom effects, and that's pretty much been all taken away. It's a much cleaner looking game. It still has a bit of a sort of, I wouldn't say washed out, but it does have a bit of a drab color scheme, but I think that's much more artistically intentional rather than just sort of like, this is what we could do. And yeah, so those are your big changes. Combat, big improvement. And the graphics and sort of the general tone and look of the game, I think has been improved and cleared. Like, the character models are very different, though. That is another thing. Not just because it's Brother NieR instead of Papa NieR. You'll also notice that, yeah, the character models, especially for like Kaine in particular, boy, they look pretty different from their original versions. It's Devla Popla, another big example of that, but I think that was done almost in service of sort of having a more unified look, because the character models this time definitely look a lot closer to what would later become like I guess it's a standard now, but yeah, they definitely look a lot more in line with how character models look in NieR Automata, and I think that was also intentional. So yeah, that's getting out of the way. And so all that out of the way, that's technical jargon. How do I feel about the game as a whole now that I've completed it and I've gotten all the endings? And I will say that it actually, in a weird sort of way, reminds me a lot of Final Fantasy VII Remake from last year. And to get really into the nitty-gritty of that, it's kind of a mediocre game that's highly elevated by its presentation, characters, and story. So, all being said, Final Fantasy VII Remake has a much higher budget and obviously much more going for its presentation, especially in the just general cutscene department, if you will. So yeah, it's a much, you know, more polished experience if you're saying Final Fantasy VII Remake. I think on a general level, though, it reminds me very much of that. And how it reminds me of that is that the game design, and it's particularly with particular note into the level design and game design and game flow is kind of average. It's very mediocre. Like, it's nothing really spectacular or stand out, like, at all. And what I mean is that take away your character, you know, visuals, take away everything. Make everything look like Tofu from Resident Evil 2 Remake. Make everything an untextured polygon. And take away the story and the cutscenes. And it's just like, okay, just progressing from point A to B, how much fun is this, you know, if you take away all that other dressing. And it's, yeah, again, it's very much like if you had no context and no story characters driving you or the plot forward, I think the actual game here is kind of mediocre. It's actually, and in fact, I'd say it's actually kind of bad, especially for large chunks of it. And what I mean by this is like, for the beginning part of the game, you do a little bit of running back and forth in your opening village, and then you go to your first sort of like dungeon combat area, and it's just this really boring repeating circle of like room, enemies, room, enemies, room, enemies. And then you get to the top and you have like the basic of all basic block movement puzzle things, and then it's just, here's a boss. And then the next dungeon area you go to is another corridor enemy, corridor enemy. Like, just here's a room, like a square room, enemies, fight them, move on. Rectangular room, enemies, fight them, move on. Like repeating rooms, repeating visuals, repeating enemies. Like, it's pretty shockingly mediocre, and it starts to throw some twists at you the more you get into it, and that's actually where the fun part comes in, is that the game almost seemed to realize that it was kind of bog standard, so it starts to throw some loops at you where, like, you'll have tiny segments that are a little bit like bullet hell, but they're very, 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 very minor in comparison to, say, what happened in NieR Automata, where we're constantly switching to shmup style gameplay. But you'll do all kinds of crazy things. You'll do text-based adventures. You'll do overhead style stuff. Like, it'll do some fun genre shifting stuff to sort of like liven it up. I'd say there's even possibly a little bit more genre shifting than in NieR Automata, where NieR Automata seemed to go from vertical shooter, horizontal shooter, twin stick shooter to third person action, character driven combat. In this game, it's a little bit more like, well, here's an overhead, here's like a quasi isometric, here's a text based adventure, but you know, and I don't want to forget either. There's even like a slight nod to survival horror in NieR Replicant as well. So yeah, they do a lot of little fun little twists and turns throughout the game to sort of like liven it up. Because again, I don't think the general flow holds up all that well on its own, which is a little bit unfortunate. But you know, they do try to soften the blow, and the blow is softened a lot by the improved combat system. I can't even imagine trying to go through this game and get all the endings, you know, with the old style combat. But yeah, it's very much in that same vein where it's like, we love this game for its characters and its story and things that are pushing us forward, rather than, because if it was like, say, the cast of Star Ocean 4, no one would put up with this. And I felt that was true in Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I kind of feel it's true here. One big difference, though, here is that there's a lot more openness, mobility, and that's not to say like, oh, it's this big open world game. It's actually a fairly small game as far as like landmass goes. Like, you have more freedom to run around it, but like it's you kind of go between a whole bunch of branches of the Central Plains area. It's a lot like Ocarina of Time. It reminds me a hell of a lot like Ocarina of Time in its world map design. So it has that very Ocarina of Time style 3D Zelda feel, like original like, you know, the first couple 3D Zelda feels, you know, like Hyrule Field, Termina Field, stuff like that. And you kind of go into the sort of branched out areas. You kind of go back and forth between them. So it feels very heavily much, you know, inspired by the sort of design of Ocarina of Time, which it works well enough, but like the actual amount of places you go, it's not that large actually, nor is it really all that varied. And I think that's probably gets into like probably what is the sort of worst aspect of the game, and that is to get a full completion of the title, you have to repeat not only going to these areas, but like you got to repeat playing through like, you know, a whole section of the game over and over and over again, and not in a good way. See, in NieR Automata, you played through the game once, and then you had to repeat it with the secondary character. However, the secondary character in NieR Automata had completely different intros and endings. So you got not only did you get a perspective change, and not only did you get more story playing through the second time, but the intros and ending segments of the second character you play as an Automata were completely different. And then you got a whole second half of your game that was almost entirely brand new, and was definitely moving the plot forward. Here, you don't get that. You play as a younger version of the main protagonist, and then you play as the older version, and then if you want to see the true ending, you got to play through as the older version of the protagonist multiple times, and then if you want to go beyond that, you have to make sure you acquire every weapon in the game, and that is a requirement that Automata never made you do to see all the endings. So the game not only forces you to replay segments completely wholesale more than once, more than even twice, but it also makes sure that you have to acquire every bit of weaponry that the game has to offer, which, you know, will mean you have to buy some, you have to do a couple side quests. One in particular is really bad. So yeah, I think the requirement to see this game full to completion is much more of a slog than NieR Automata. NieR Automata, again, you only have to replay a segment once with a different character who has gameplay changes, but has completely different beginnings and endings. Whereas in this game, it is you play through the second half of the game 3 times at least, and then to get to, you know, the true endings, you know, beyond that. So it's like, woof. I don't think that's a particularly fun, and I don't really think it's, honestly, if anything, they might, I feel like it didn't really add much. In fact, doing the third playthrough, to get to ending C and D, if you will, getting those endings is there's almost nothing. Like, there's some stuff added, but like the amount of new content or new story content they add on that third playthrough is so minor. It's shocking. And then if you want to get to the true ending, you have to also replay another segment, again, and it's like, oh my god. Like, I definitely feel this game suffers a bit from its weird troll mentality of wanting you to see, if you want to see everything the game has to offer and you want to see how all the different scenarios play out, you're basically doing a whole lot of the same stuff over and over again. Like, it's repetitious to a near breaking point. But the good news is that you are getting very drastically different outcomes. You are not playing through the same game and kind of watching the same ending. You're getting very different endings. So there is payoff there, at least. Like, and of course you could always just skip through stuff, though I would say like skipping through stuff on the second playthrough is probably the best in a way, because the first playthrough, you'll base, it's really interesting. And this is why, and let me just segue right here, this is why the story is so good in this game, because it does something a video game can really only do, which is by replaying a game, you can, on a second playthrough, you can add stuff in to the story. You can add, like, not only just new cutscenes, but you can add new elements, new subtitles, new bits and pieces here. And that can basically serve as interesting revelations or interesting twists and narrative design that just doesn't work in any other fashion. It has to be through a game, because you could, but like, you can't sit there and watch through a movie and then it's like, okay, now watch the movie again and we'll add some new subtitles to it. Like, you can't do that. Like, you can't do that in film. You can't do it in TV. You could do it, but like, who the hell would bother with that? Or who would want to watch a movie where like a third of the cutscenes are missing, and it's like, they only get it if you watch it a second time. You probably could do that, but I don't think anyone would appreciate that at all. But here in a video game, it works well, because you get New Game Plus. Say you beat the game once, and it's like, okay, now I want to do it again to see the new story content, but you are carrying over your level and your weapons and things you've gotten, so it's not quite the same. Now you're massively overpowered, or you want to build yourself even further. So again, like, this is definitely following in the same sort of mold where Automata was the first time in a long time, if not ever, that I actually sat through a video game and went like, wow, what a great story. Only gaming could tell a story like this. And it's good on top of it. I mean, there's plenty of ways to tell a game-only story, but is it any good? And that's probably, usually no. So as for my actual thoughts and opinions on the story and characters itself, it's still very good. I do think this game is a feeler, whereas Automata was a thinker. And a lot of people sort of really like the cast and characters of this game, and they prefer it much more to Automata. And I actually think that's by design. I think that's something a lot of people don't quite get, or think it's a very binary, like, well, which cast do you like more? And it's like, I think the characters in Automata are by design not supposed to be as colorful and interesting as the characters in NieR Replicant. I think it's intentional. I've always thought it was intentional, and I think it's, playing through the game now, I'm like, I'm more convinced than ever that, like, I think Automata was by design not meant to have the same type of emotional cruxes here. Now, Automata is a very meta game, whereas this is not meta at all, really. Maybe you could probably get some stuff out of it, but this game is much more character focused and focused on its own little story and world and characters, where Automata, it had its own story, world, and characters, but it was also extremely meta in its approach and its approach to storytelling and everything else, and even in gameplay. So this game feels much more, insular, but also focused on its world and characters. And again, I absolutely think this is by design. I think if you're familiar with the entire world setting of Automata, it's not really meant to be a sort of pseudo-fantasy world with lots of interesting, colorful characters that you meet. Like, that's the point, I feel. And, but here or there, again, so with Automata, again, you get a big thinker of a game. Again, that'll make, ponder things and sort of question things. about maybe even yourself in your own life, where NieR Replicant's very much just a feeler. It's very much a fantasy game with its own characters that are constantly sort of punching you in the dick with its emotions. Like, it's a roller coaster ride. Like, this game, I've equated this game to basically trying to watch something like Never-Ending Story, but every scene ends with the horse dying. That's kind of what it feels like, especially when you start getting into the later half of the main storyline of NieR Replicant. It is just a constant barrage of just tragedies and just sort of emotional things. Sometimes they're not, and they're not all just bad. It's not all about like horrible things on the wheel. There are some things that are actually very emotionally stirring that are not tragic, and that's actually one of the big things in this game. In fact, I think probably one of the more emotionally resonating moments I encountered in the game was actually a very happy moment. So yeah, like the game is just a much more emotional roller coaster of a game. It's a feeler for sure, and I do really like that about it. And I do actually highly encourage, like, if you're not going to see it all the way through to the end, you should definitely go through it at least twice, because the second time around, which is only, again, you only play the second half of the game multiple times. When you play through the back half of the game for the second time, you get so much more context and more cutscenes and a lot more just a general knowledge of the goings on of all the characters in the world, and it's really well done, and it feels way more impactful, I feel, than pretty much most other games being made today. Like, even if some things are a little heightened, if you will, or maybe a little too anime dramatic, it still I think it still kind of works. Like, it doesn't. The one thing this game doesn't have a lot of is subtlety. There's vagueness, and then there's like things to ponder and think about, and the connections to both future and past games is also interesting in this game. But like, characters kind of let you know how they feel, like really, really direct and to the point. Like, you're not gonna sit there and ponder like how a character really feels in any given situation. They let you know, and the cutscenes let you know. So it's kind of got that going for it there. So you're definitely getting a very highly dramatic game, and it's funny too. I don't want to say this game is like devoid of humor and it's just like a constant barrage of bad things. There's plenty of humorous things. A lot of that is probably more locked into maybe side quests or just like sort of minor characters, but like it's still there. Although frankly, like one of the character Kaine in particular almost never fails to get a chuckle out of me. Also, like, there's a lot of like dry humor too with your companion character Vice, which basically serves as your Navi. I don't know. There's a lot of heart in the game, and heart doesn't come just from big emotional climaxes. It also can come from just the menial day-to-day side questing and how the characters respond to it. And which, by the way, this game is fully voiced for all the NPCs this time as well, so that also really goes a long way. And some of the NPCs are actually voiced very well, I feel. And there's some standout longtime VOs doing some very minor roles in this game, which is pretty cool to see. So I think there's a lot going for there. However, I didn't do a whole lot of side quests in general because most of them are pretty just menial, boring tasks. Now, there are some side quests that definitely give you more insight and help paint the world a little more in detail, but you are going to be doing a whole lot of back and forth, a whole lot of dumb chore fetch questing. So you take that as you will. Like, the one nice thing is that to get to the full ending, you only really need to do about 3 side quests. If you're just trying to get the endings, as far as like mandatory side questing goes, like you only need to do about 3 to get the full scope of the game. So that's nice. But all that being said, I do like what's here, but it's not quite as large scale, as you might assume. But there are multiple towns. There are multiple areas to go. It's not a tiny game, but it's also not super large in scope either, and you're not going to be like journeying across the world or anything like that. it's a very tight-knit experience as far as that goes. So yeah, my general thoughts though are like I do really like the characters. I do really like the world. Again, the music is interesting because I've listened to the original soundtrack many times, so I'm familiar with how it sounds in the original, but I'm not familiar with how it plays out or sounds in the context of playing the game in the original. Whereas this game is a remixed soundtrack, and I thought it was really good, but I don't actually have the context of, like, I know what the original soundtrack sounds like, I've listened to it plenty of times, but I don't know how that feels in the context of playing the actual video game. All I can say for the remix soundtrack is I think it's still very good. I think it works really well. I think it is much like the story and characters. It's haunting and will stick with you. I think, you know, there's really, you know, it's hard for me to have, I don't really have a comparison other than to just say, I think it's good, I think it works. I don't know how to compare it otherwise, so you're just going to have to trust other people's opinions who've actually played through both versions of these games. I'm not that person. But yeah, as boiling it all down though, do I think the game is worth it? Yes, but it is grindy. I think if you play, and again, it's a bit, you know, a lot of people do play JRPGs for the story and characters. If you're playing a video game for the story, for the characters, you really can't go wrong here. I still think this is top of the line. I think this is still best in class. It does, like I said, it doesn't have anywhere near the budget or polish of, say, Final Fantasy VII Remake, but what it does have is a much better written story and I'd honestly say more endearing characters, and that's not to say 7 doesn't, because I think 7 has absolutely fucking phenomenally enduring characters, but there's just something that's just emotionally resonating and just clutches you, you know, by the heartstrings hard with this small cast of characters in this game. And yeah, they're definitely more sympathetic and endearing and emotionally resonating than the cast of Automata, but I think that's by design, honestly. So you're getting top of the line characters, story. You're getting top of the line music. The graphics are serviceable. I played it on PS5, but it is a PS4 game. So, but on PS5, it pretty much stayed consistent with its frame rate almost all the way through. You know, dipping rarely, you know, here and there on major areas. But yeah, like it's a fantastic narratively character-driven piece of game. The actual core game itself, the combat's much better. You're never gonna feel bored with the combat. You're never gonna feel like you don't want to do the combat. But the actual design and level design and progression design of the game is not great. It's actually fairly fucking average. And in fact, it's outright bad in a few instances. So take that as you will, but the game absolutely is greater. The sum is greater than the whole for this game. Like where it counts as far as like presentation and story goes, top of the line. When it comes to gameplay, well, combat's good, not great, and design is mediocre, occasionally dipping its toe into just straight up bad. So that makes it very hard to actually rate. Honestly, if I'm being 100% honest here, I think critically the game is like a 7 leading into maybe even a 6, because again, the design is really bad. If the combat wasn't such an improvement here and wasn't, you know, fun and fluid, it would definitely be like a 6 or a 5 as far as like actual critical goes, because yeah, it's man, like the pacing and flow of the game is really not great. But I think critically this game is absolutely like an 8.5 or a 9 for me. It's really hard to say, because it's like, for me, I'm not rating the game strictly on its story and characters. It's a 10 out of 10 if you're rating it on its story and characters and soundtrack. But you know, as a full complete package, it's like an 8.5, you know, or so for me. But critically, I'd say it's about a 7. And the thing is like, there's really no way to know if you're going to resonate with the characters or story in this game. Some people don't. And if you do not resonate or are not intrigued by the story and the characters and the things going on in this, you are not probably going to enjoy this game very much, honestly, very much at all. I think they're great, but the thing, that's a pretty subjective thing, and there might be images and things that might disturb you in this game. There's I don't really want to get into spoilers, but there's some hard things. Like, this is an M-rated game for a reason, and it's not because some chick's butt's always hanging out, but it's M-rated because you're going to see violent, bloody images, and you're just going to see just things that are just almost mean-spirited. It's just horrific events play out in this game to the characters, to other things in this world. Like, it's a hard game. It's a harsh reality, and it's fair if some people really don't want to see that. Like, I'd almost say, hey, if you're, and I don't know, like, this is a bit of a spoiler, but I'm gonna say it. But if you're kind of, if seeing animals getting killed is hard on you, keep in mind the first thing you do in the game is you have to go kill some sheep, kind of thing. Like, the first thing you do in the game. Well, I mean, not the first, but like the first, almost. One of the earliest things you do in the game is you have to go kill some sheep, and then it gets worse from there. Is all I'm gonna say. Like, it gets worse from there, and if seeing that stuff is hard and you can't handle doing that, I don't know that I would recommend this game, because that's just the beginning of how rough it is. Because I know some people have a really hard time, with animal death on screen, and fuck. So just keep in mind, first thing you're gonna have to do is kill some innocent sheep, and then it's just gonna get worse from there. That being said, yeah, it's definitely a game that stuck with me, resonated with me. But as far as just generally going, it's not as good as Automata, and that's okay, because it's still very good. But it's not Platinum Games heights of combat and feel. It's pretty good though. It's still decent enough. But I think the design of Automata, I think the combat of Automata was definitely better, and the pacing in Automata was a little quicker and better done than here, and the requirements to see all the endings in Automata definitely handled a lot better than here. So you're not getting quite as polished an experience as Automata, but you're getting something that's very different, much more of a feeler game, much more of a character-driven focus with its story, narrative. It's definitely like its own beast, and I think it's well worth checking out. If you really liked Automata like me, you owe it to yourself to check this out. And if you're new to the whole series and are looking for a jumping in point, again, go watch Clemps' videos on Drakengard, and then dive in here or dive in with Automata. They're pretty separate. There's very, very small connections between them. You don't have to worry about having to understand anything or not. It's just, hey, if you want that weird, deep connection that's very vaguely hinted at in these games, watch Clemps' videos, and then dive into Replicant or Automata. I think you'll have a great time with either, as long as you're aware these games are not meant to make you feel super great. they're definitely thinkers, and in Replicant's case, a feeler. So let me know what you guys think, and I will see you on the channel later, dudes.